John hiked through the woods, birds sang, leaves crunched under his boots. Then a sound stopped him, a tiny whimper. He followed the sound. He found a small, furry creature. Big brown eyes looked up at him. It shivered, alone and scared. John scooped it up gently. It felt like a soft ball of fur in his arms. He felt a surge of protectiveness. He had to help it. John decided to take it home. He wrapped it in his jacket. It snuggled closer. John felt a warmth spread through him. It was the feeling of a new connection. He smiled. "You're safe now, little one," he whispered. At home, John examined his find. He had been out for a walk when he stumbled upon a small, shivering bundle of fur near the park. It was a chilly evening, and the little creature looked lost and scared. John couldn't just leave it there, so he decided to bring it home. Now, sitting on his porch, he could see it more clearly. It was definitely a puppy, he thought. Its fur was a mix of brown and white, and its eyes were big and round, filled with curiosity and a hint of fear. John felt a pang of sympathy for the little one. Big paws, clumsy movements, and a playful nip at his finger. He chuckled. The puppy's antics were endearing, and John found himself smiling more than he had in a long time. It was as if this little creature had brought a spark of joy into his life. This little guy was full of spirit. Despite its small size, the puppy had an abundance of energy. It ran around the garden, its tail wagging furiously, and John couldn't help but laugh at its exuberance. It was clear that this puppy had a zest for life. He fed the puppy warm milk. He remembered reading somewhere that puppies needed nourishment and warmth, especially if they were separated from their mother. John carefully poured some milk into a small dish and watched as the puppy eagerly approached it. It lapped it up eagerly. The sight of the puppy drinking so enthusiastically made John feel a sense of accomplishment. He was glad he could provide some comfort to this little creature. He made a cozy bed in a box. John found an old blanket and a sturdy cardboard box, arranging them to create a makeshift bed. He wanted the puppy to feel safe and secure in its new environment. The puppy snuggled in, tail wagging. John watched, heart full. He named it Lucky. It felt right. The name seemed to suit the puppy perfectly, as it had been fortunate enough to cross paths with John. Days turned into a week. During this time, John and Lucky developed a routine. They would wake up early, have breakfast together, and then spend the day exploring the backyard or going for walks in the neighborhood. John and Lucky were inseparable. Wherever John went, Lucky was sure to follow. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, and John couldn't imagine his life without the little puppy. They went for walks in the park. These walks became a cherished part of their daily routine. John enjoyed the fresh air and the exercise, while Lucky loved exploring the new sights and smells. Lucky chased squirrels, much to John's amusement. The puppy's playful nature was infectious, and John found himself laughing more than he had in years. It was as if Lucky had brought a new sense of joy and purpose into his life. John talked to Lucky, sharing his thoughts and dreams. He found it surprisingly therapeutic to have someone to confide in, even if that someone was a puppy. Lucky listened attentively, his big brown eyes focused on John. Lucky listened with his big brown eyes. It was as if the puppy understood every word John said. This silent companionship was comforting, and John felt a deep sense of connection with Lucky. Their bond grew stronger each day. John realized that finding Lucky was one of the best things that had ever happened to him. The puppy had brought love, laughter, and companionship into his life, and for that, John was eternally grateful. One morning, John noticed Lucky seemed unwell. He was lethargic, his nose dry. John worried. "Don't worry, Lucky," he soothed. "We'll figure this out." He decided to take Lucky to the vet. The vet's office was bustling. John filled out forms, his anxiety growing. Finally, they were called in. John held Lucky close, whispering reassurances. It was time to find out what was wrong. Dr. Smith, a kind-faced woman, entered. She smiled at John. "So this is Lucky?" she asked, reaching out to pet him. John nodded, a lump forming in his throat. Dr. Smith lifted Lucky onto the examination table. Dr. Smith began her checkup. She checked Lucky's ears, his eyes, his teeth. John watched her every move, his heart pounding. Then Dr. Smith paused. Her eyes widened. A look of shock crossed her face. "Mr. Smith," she began, her voice hesitant, "I need to examine Lucky a bit further. Please wait here." She disappeared into the back room, taking Lucky with her. John was confused. What was going on? Minutes stretched into an eternity. John paced the small room, his mind racing. He couldn't shake off the image of Dr. Smith's shocked face. What had she seen? Was Lucky okay? He had to know. The door opened. Dr. Smith returned, her face serious. She took a deep breath. "Mr. Smith," she began, choosing her words carefully. "I've examined Lucky thoroughly." John held his breath, his heart pounding. "Mr. Smith," Dr. Smith continued, "Lucky isn't a puppy." John frowned. What did she mean? He looked at Lucky, who was back in his arms, looking perfectly fine. He was a puppy, wasn't he? Dr. Smith took another deep breath. "Mr. Smith," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "Lucky is a fox cub." John stared at her, his mind reeling. A fox cub? But that was impossible, wasn't it? Dr. Smith explained that baby foxes and puppies could look similar, especially to an untrained eye. Lucky's playful behavior, his soft fur, his big eyes, they had all pointed to him being a puppy, but he wasn't. He was a wild animal. John looked at Lucky. He looked the same, yet everything felt different. This small creature wasn't a domesticated pet. He was a wild animal who belonged in the forest. John's heart ached. Dr. Smith explained that keeping a wild animal as a pet was illegal. It was also dangerous for both John and for Lucky. Wild animals needed special care and environments that John couldn't provide. John knew Dr. Smith was right. He had always trusted her judgment when it came to animals. She had a way of understanding them, a way of seeing what was best for them, even when it was hard for their human companions to accept. John had found Lucky, abandoned in the woods, a tiny, helpless puppy with no one to care for him. He had taken him in, nursed him back to health, and in the process had grown deeply attached to the little creature. As much as it pained him, he knew he couldn't keep Lucky. The puppy was a wild animal at heart, and keeping him in a domestic environment would only stifle his true nature. John had always known this day would come, but it didn't make it any easier. He had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that there might be another way, a way for Lucky to stay with him, without compromising his well-being. He had to do what was best for him, even if it meant letting him go. The thought of Lucky running free in the wild, living the life he was meant to live, was the only thing that gave John any comfort. He hugged the puppy tightly, feeling the warmth of his small body against his chest, and tried to memorize every detail of this moment. "What happens now?" John asked, his voice heavy with emotion. He needed to know that Lucky would be okay, that he would be taken care of. The uncertainty of the future was almost too much to bear. Dr. Smith explained that she would contact the local wildlife sanctuary. They had the resources and expertise to care for animals like Lucky, animals that needed a special kind of attention and environment to thrive. She assured John that the sanctuary staff were dedicated and compassionate, and that they would do everything in their power to ensure Lucky's well-being. They specialized in caring for wild animals. The sanctuary was a place where animals could heal, grow, and eventually return to their natural habitats. It was a place of hope and second chances, a place where animals like Lucky could find their true selves. They would take care of Lucky, make sure he was healthy, and eventually release him back into the wild. The thought of Lucky running free, exploring the world as he was meant to, brought a bittersweet smile to John's face. It was the right thing to do, even if it broke his heart. John listened, a lump forming in his throat. He tried to focus on Dr. Smith's words, but his mind kept drifting to memories of Lucky. The way he would wag his tail excitedly, the way he would curl up next to him on the couch, the way he would look at him with those big, trusting eyes. He knew this was the right thing to do. He had to be strong for Lucky, had to put his needs above his own desires. It was a lesson in selflessness, in understanding that love sometimes means letting go. But it didn't make it any easier. The thought of coming home to an empty house, of not having Lucky there to greet him, was almost unbearable. He had grown so used to the puppy's presence, to the joy and companionship he brought into his life. He had grown so attached to Lucky. The bond they shared was something special, something that couldn't be easily replaced. He remembered the first time he had seen Lucky, how small and fragile he had looked, and how determined he had been to give him a better life. The thought of saying goodbye was unbearable. But John knew that true love meant doing what was best for Lucky, even if it meant breaking his own heart. He took a deep breath, hugged Lucky one last time and whispered, "I love you, little guy. Be free." Later that day at the wildlife sanctuary, John said goodbye to Lucky. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the sanctuary, making the moment even more poignant. John had known this day would come, but it didn't make it any easier. He had found Lucky as a stray, wandering the streets, hungry and scared. Over the past few weeks they had formed an unbreakable bond, one that John knew would last a lifetime, even if they were apart. He knelt down, looked into those big brown eyes one last time. Lucky's eyes seemed to understand, as if he knew this was goodbye. John felt a lump in his throat as he tried to hold back tears. He remembered the first time he saw those eyes filled with fear and uncertainty. Now, they were filled with trust and love. "Be wild, little buddy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He wanted Lucky to know that it was okay to be free, to embrace the wild spirit within him. John had always believed that animals deserved to live in their natural habitats, and this was his way of giving Lucky that chance. He handed Lucky over to a kind-faced woman who promised to take good care of him. She was a wildlife rehabilitator, someone who dedicated her life to helping animals return to the wild. John felt a sense of relief knowing that Lucky was in good hands. The woman assured him that Lucky would be monitored and cared for until he was ready to be released. As John watched them disappear, he felt a pang of sadness but also a sense of peace. He knew that this was the best thing for Lucky. The sanctuary was a place where animals could heal and thrive, away from the dangers of the city. John had done everything he could to prepare Lucky for this moment. He had done the right thing. It was a bittersweet feeling, knowing that he had to let go of something he loved so much. But John believed in the greater good, in giving Lucky the chance to live a life of freedom and adventure. He stood there for a while, lost in thought, reflecting on the journey they had shared. Even though their time together was short, the bond between John and Lucky was real. They had shared moments of joy and laughter, and those memories would stay with John forever. He remembered the way Lucky would wag his tail excitedly whenever he saw him, the way they would run through the fields, carefree and happy. It was a reminder that love and compassion could be found in the most unexpected places. John had never expected to find a friend in a stray dog, but Lucky had changed his life in ways he couldn't have imagined. Their bond was a testament to the power of love and the impact it could have on both humans and animals, and that sometimes letting go was the greatest act of love. John waved goodbye, knowing that this was not the end, but a new beginning for Lucky. He walked away with a heavy heart, but also with hope, knowing that he had given Lucky the chance to live the life he was meant to live. As he left the sanctuary, he felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that he had made a difference in Lucky's life. John's experience was a reminder that wild animals belong in the wild. If you ever find yourself in a similar situation, remember to contact the proper authorities. They are best equipped to handle wildlife and ensure their safety and well-being. Remember, a wild animal might seem cute and cuddly, but it's still a wild animal. It deserves to live a free and natural life, and sometimes the kindest thing we can do is let them go.